Welcome to Fleets Evolved, where we talk about the reality of commercial fleet electrification. Each episode, I sit down with industry experts to cut through the noise and explore what's actually working, what isn't, and where fleet operators get stuck. If you're responsible for electrifying a fleet, you already know that this isn't a walk in the park, and getting the decisions right really matters. I'm Natasha. Welcome to the show. We've got an incredible guest with us today. Gareth Sutcliffe is the Commercial Fleet Sales Manager for Kempower's UK and Ireland operations. He has a background in energy, grid services, public charging investment and DC and AC charging solutions, and is super passionate about the drive towards zero carbon. Before Kempower, Gareth worked for an array of clean tech companies, including Mighty Plan Zero, Equans and NG. Kempower, if you don't know, is a global provider of DC fast charging solutions for electric vehicles. They design and manufacture charging solutions for EVs across the full e-mobility spectrum, including cars, trucks, buses, machines and marine. Kempower was recently named as the third fastest growing company in Europe's electrical manufacturing sector by the Financial Times. One thing we've always tried to do with this podcast is keep the conversation real and authentic. I've worked with Kempower and Gareth for several years now, and what's always struck me is just how knowledgeable, credible and insightful Gareth is when it comes to this space. So I am really looking forward to today's conversation. I think there's going to be some great insight, I'm sure. Gareth, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for agreeing to come on. I guess first things first, I need to ask you how you are. How are you?
I'm really good, and thanks for the brilliant introduction. No, it's good to be here, and obviously thanks for the invite. And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. Looking forward to it.
I think so too. And, you know, the name of the podcast, Fleets Evolved, we try and bring a lot of knowledge and insight into this specific sector. And I do appreciate Kempower is a wide plethora, which I explained in the intro. I always try and start the podcast, guys, with trying to set the scene a little bit around the market and any insights. So I guess the first thing I'm intrigued to ask you is, what trends are you currently seeing in fleet electrification and the deployment of charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think for sure the market is growing at a significant pace. We're definitely seeing varying kind of trends across Europe in different regions. I mean, from a UK perspective, so to give you some kind of data that sits behind it, we saw a 34% year-on-year increase in order intake last year from the bus sector, and a 24% increase on truck sector. So there's really, really strong momentum in the market, that's for sure. I think in terms of how that evolves over the coming years, I think a lot of that will depend on kind of regional, kind of geopolitical trends and what the political will looks like in different territories, I suppose. Obviously, as you know, the UK government's just announced a £1 billion package of incentives to help support this transition for fleets. So such a positive sign and such a positive signal from UK government. There's been similar investment in Germany. Well, 500 million euros recently invested by the German government to support the bus market over there specifically. But then you see other regions such as Norway and the Netherlands, for example, which are much more advanced than we are in electrification, where growth rates will be probably naturally quite lower. So it depends on. It really is kind of regional dependent, but ultimately momentum is really strong.
And I would agree. And I think from our experience, I mean, you guys get involved with a lot of, I spoke about the trucks and the buses. I mean, for me, there's a lot of manufacturer dependence as well, isn't there, in terms of what vehicles are coming to the market and the speed of deployment and the research and development that goes into all that as well. For those that, obviously, I want to start talking around the demand for like AC and DC chargers. Do you see, is there a shift in demand between the two? Because you guys focus very heavily, I guess, in the DC side of the market, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, bus and truck is 100% a DC market. The big bus operators out there and the truck operators, they need power, and they need to be able to get power into their vehicles quickly. So that is a definite trend. I'd say that from an ELCV perspective, I think it really is kind of use case dependent. Obviously kind of commuter vehicles and ELCV is a much more established market, you could argue, than bus and truck. So AC really has been the technology of kind of choice for both of those segments. But either AC or DC can work for LCV. It really does depend on what the fleet operator wants to achieve and what the actual use case is. Where you've got long dwell times of vehicles, AC is a very, very good solution. It's low cost to install, it's reliable, and it works very well. It's a very well established technology. For fleets that want a little bit more versatility, so they want those long vehicle dwell times, but they also want to be able to be more reactive with rapid charging and maybe serving different use cases. Then DC gives them that flexibility. But yeah, either works. It really is use case dependent.
And I think that's a really important point that you touched on there. And it seems to be a common theme in recent podcasts. I mean, we've just had one with ESP where we talk about grid constraints and power. In
Yeah.
all of the themes, it is about planning, isn't it? And the individual use case. I think the key thing is one size doesn't certainly fit all. Although the technology and the hardware seems to be quite stagnant, you've got AC, DC, the use case is the most important part. And it probably goes back a step as well when you look at fleet optimization. What's the fleet currently doing today? What does that operation want to achieve? Because what you're trying to do is replicate something that exists today whilst improving it, enhancing it, and obviously making it work more efficiently. So it is down to use case, isn't it? And I guess this is where fleet managers probably rely on industry experts like you and I to help them through that process, to help them on that journey, to maybe understand that that's the crucial piece of the puzzle to start off with. I mean, you must be in a similar scenario when we get inquiries into the business where somebody's already got a preconceived idea and they think rapid charging, that's what we need. We want fast charging. But it's not until you start to peel the layers back and you start to really get under the skin of the operation to really establish that actually DC might not always work in that environment. AC could be a better solution, or a good blend might support what they're trying to achieve. So when it comes to EV fleet managers, I guess you probably you come across them maybe just as frequently, if not so more than I do. In your experience, what tends to be the common themes for them when you're speaking to them? I mean, what matters the most to them in your experience?
Yeah, and to your early point, Natasha, I think the fact is that this is no longer a brand new kind of market. It is well established now. There are lots of lessons that have been learned by many different fleets out there. But ultimately, if you are a fleet operator, having early conversations, with good businesses around the UK, about making that long term plan, not just around kind of EV charging hardware or the trucks or the buses or the vans, but ultimately the energy conversation as well is so important. So many fleet operators go out there and buy the trucks, but ultimately the long term planning around grid power, depot charging is so important because that really is the key enabler for this industry. But yeah, so I would say that in terms of kind of conversations that we have with fleet managers, um, again, it is use case dependent, but the common theme that runs through every single conversation is reliability, 100%. No matter what industry you're in, no matter what type of fleet you're operating, the wheels must turn. So reliability is absolutely key. For CPOs out there, and obviously Mer being a CPO, you'll know all about this. Return on investment, again, is a high priority. The ability to sell more power through your chargers or to deliver more power to vehicles, on a reliable basis is absolutely crucial. And then I think probably for some of the more advanced fleets out there at the moment, energy versatility is becoming a real hot topic. So not only how do we charge our vehicles, reliably and ensure optimum uptime of vehicles, but how do we use energy intelligently to do that? And therefore, how do we cut costs and how do we become more competitive in our markets? So I'd say that the market is very much shifting from can we do this to, okay, well, we know we can, the technology's out there. How do we do it more intelligently and how do we become more profitable and really kind of make the most of the opportunity that electrification presents?
And that is, I would agree 100%. I think that's the interesting kind of mix now. That's how I think the industry is evolving at such a pace that I think fleet operators need to maybe continue now to start looking at, the space that they're looking to electrify shouldn't just be seen as it's not just an investment in terms of capital up front, is it? I mean, I always say this, it's not it's not an expensive in like upfront cost. It's relative and it matters and it's all in line with what the industry is expecting. But if this is the first time you're doing this, it can come across and look as quite an expensive investment to have to make. I think the industry is definitely moving towards how to optimize that space much better. And energy is such a huge component about how to manage that intelligently, how to optimize it, and also how to maybe turn it into more of a revenue generation
Mm.
scenario for fleet managers as well. And that's where the use cases tend to become a little bit more sustainable when it goes then in front of the key stakeholders in the business to understand what you're trying to do with that space and trying to improve on that. So we've spoken a little bit on your interpretation of the current market and some of the trends and how fleet managers approach you. I guess for those that don't necessarily know who Kempower are, but equally for those that do, your process, talk us through, because you support customers right the way through the entire journey, don't you? From pre-design right the way through to supporting charges that are in the ground in terms of maintenance and upkeep and everything else. Can you just talk us through your end-to-end process, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Kempower we are a global business, headquarters in Finland, but we've got a UK office down in Bedford in the UK, and we've got teams of people here in the UK as well. I think ultimately, Kempower, our core focus in life is to design and manufacture what we think are the best quality products on the market. Um, and that has always been the focus of the business, and that will continue. But ultimately, in terms of what customers can expect from Kempower, we work with a selected team of sales and service partners here in the UK who deliver full turnkey solutions for customers. Um, and obviously, our kind of interest in this thing is to obviously serve customers as well as we can and give them the right hardware. But that turnkey solution really is critical. Um, and what that means is that from pre-design, concept design work through to that crucial topic of energy and securing grid capacity, through to the installation, maintenance, and effective operation of those assets. We have, like I say, sales and service partners here in the UK, of which Mur is one, who can deliver that for customers. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean to say that Kempower will just disappear off into the background. The way that we like to work with our partners and with end customers is really on a proactive basis over the lifespan of those assets. Um, for example, here in the UK, we have a solution support team who can help with anything kind of pre-installation. So that is, optimum placement of power units to satellites, wiring configurations, and getting things right first time on site. We've got a life cycle services team again that is global, but also has a local presence that can support with maintenance and reactive maintenance of assets, for example. We've got an energy team based in Finland who, again, coming back to that key topic of smart use of power, can provide data, insight, and obviously technology around that in terms of battery technology, for example. And then we've got segment teams who can really kind of dig into global trends in certain segments, and ultimately help customers make the right choices when it comes to installing new assets or evolving their charging portfolio. So whilst, like I say, we do have that kind of luxury of the sales and service partner team here in the UK, we do like to be hands on and I suppose share some of the benefits of having that kind of charger OEM as part of that relationship. That's something that we're very keen on.
Good stuff. And you mentioned there actually a really interesting point, and it is all about helping customers on that journey in terms of making the right choice. I think it's about helping customers, and I think you would agree in informing them. It's all about the fact, isn't it, in terms of helping them on this journey. And with your sales and service department, it feels like that's kind of a great addition in terms of what Kempower can offer. In terms of making the right choices, then, and we bring it back to fleet managers again. But if a choice is wrong, for example, and they make something that might not necessarily work for the business as it intended to, what kind of consequences do you if the hardware is wrong and we put the wrong kit in the ground, What consequences do you see as a result of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So I think it basically comes down to more cost, lower profit, and unhappy customers. To sum it up, and I think in a market that is still relatively young, I think that can have such a negative effect on people's perception of electrification in general. So I'd say, it is important to get things right first time. And again, that will just help build momentum. I think having the wrong asset in the ground, again, it ultimately leads to kind of lower utilization, whether that's because, the hardware doesn't have sufficient uptime, and it's offline for periods of time, for example, or that asset maybe is over engineered, for example, and it's too big for what the customer ultimately needs. There's nothing from a return on investment perspective. There's nothing worse than having idle power and idle technology sat there doing nothing.
Yeah.
So, designing a good quality solution that's not going to let you down, that's going to be reliable, but that will enable you to effectively optimize the return on investment for that asset. All of that delivers a good customer experience, in my opinion. Um, yeah.
And I would agree. And do you think as well there's an element of a credibility piece as well here? If you look at some of the people that you support on a daily basis, it's not just one department within an organization, is it? It's responsible for getting these things off the ground and for delivering these projects. There's kind of wider stakeholders involved. And whoever you're talking to that's putting the business case in to the rest of the stakeholders, I guess there's an element of credibility as well, isn't there? If they get that wrong, you've obviously got the consequential damage limitation around cost and the return on investment not quite being where it needs to be. But we're dealing with a group of people that don't necessarily or wouldn't have been involved in this type of thing before. It's not like going out and purchasing a new fleet of vehicles, or it's not about going out and, buying printer paper and that kind of thing, right?
Mm.
And these people we need to help them really make those informed decisions, don't we? Because there is that element of credibility. Would you agree?
Massively agree. Massively agree. It's quite easy to get wrapped up in kind of, the technology and the kit and the advancements and the stuff that we're capable of doing. But, hearts and minds are so important, in terms of where the market is at the moment. And, if something goes wrong, to try and to try and claw that momentum back internally within these businesses, I would imagine can be very, very difficult.
I've
Um, you
seen
know,
it, Gareth. I've seen it in,
yeah.
this is my 7th year going into my 8th year working in this particular industry. My background is fleet and logistics. And I see, you have an ops director or a fleet manager that's trying desperately to do the right thing. And it's about, having those trusted relationships with people that can guide you, that can give you informed information that's factual, that can help make those correct decisions.
Mm.
Equally, I agree with your point that the industry is still quite premature, especially in the fleet space in terms of electrifying its scale. And I think things are going to go wrong, right? It might not necessarily be the hardware choice, and it's probably not relevant to this conversation, but we are talking technical pieces of equipment. And that's why it's so important to have that aftercare in place, and the reliability piece is really important. But things will go wrong. It's about accepting that that's going to happen, but making sure that you've made the right choices at the outset with the design, and you've mitigated as much risk as possible. So when those things do tend to go a little bit off piste, they're easily fixable, they're manageable, and you've got a trusted partner that can support you in that sense.
No, exactly. And when you're dealing with kind of DC power technology, like you say, it is inevitable that things will go wrong now and again. It's having the right partners and the right technology so that you know that problem doesn't become a big problem, that it's easily resolved.
Yeah.
I think there's also a point as well, in terms of the broader kind of hearts and minds piece that um, post switch, and once you do kind of take the plunge and start electrifying, that you've got the data and the evidence to actually back up the decision that you've made.
Yes.
So good availability of data, TCO data, energy data in terms of cost savings that you're making against against your grid tariffs, for example, and conventional kind of diesel supply. All that data clearly should be available to be used to evidence the decision that you've made. TCO is such a crucial topic, I'd say, for fleets, and We really are starting to see parity between, kind of electric HGVs, for example, versus conventional HGVs, just because of the advancements that can be made in terms of refueling costs or recharging costs of these vehicles. So, so yes, when things go wrong, you need the ability to fix that quickly. But also when things go right, you need the ability to be able to celebrate that and evidence that internally to show that you've made the right decision. So I think those two things are quite important.
And I think as well, just from experience, a lot of organisations won't always go into this 2 feet first anyway. They tend to need to get that proof of concept. So maybe doing one depot first by design to have a look at one location, get
Absolutely.
familiar with the use case that you've put forward, understand how to engage those stakeholders and to bring everybody onto that journey. This is where we use a lot of AI and 3D imagery and modeling and things like that to get people onto that journey. Because I think visualizing it as well sometimes is really helpful. And then I believe that once you get one underway, and you're absolutely right, the data then is absolutely critical to show the delivery of this hardware, how we can optimize it, what the energy throughput looks like, and to make sure that they can trust number one, the first one that they've done, to then maybe accelerate that and to then really kind of advance on the rest of their estate at a pace that feels more comfortable to them.
Absolutely right. Yeah, start small and then grow from there. It's the best way to do it.
It's such a massive learning process for everybody involved, isn't it? I think that sometimes to get one or two underway and successful, and it will happen with its hiccups, by the way. I don't think I've ever worked on a project that's been totally straightforward and the initial concept design turns out to be what was actually installed. But that's the whole process of going through this journey, right? You have so many different design concepts when you start out, and you end up falling at something that probably wasn't what you initially intended. But that's why it's so important to get that factual piece done at the very front end. The pre-construction, the design is such an important part in this. I'd like to now move on then, Gareth, if you don't mind, too. And it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are interested in is around innovation, right? And you look at the hardware and the systems that Kempower deliver in the market, and I must say that your distributed power system is something that's it's exceptional, and it gauges a lot of interest. Like, give for those that are listening that want a bit more information around how dynamic the hardware is, can you just give us a little bit more information around what it does, what it actually is, the dynamic piece of the hardware, and also why it could be such a game changer for EV fleets here in the UK?
Yeah, thanks, Tasha. I mean, so Kempower is very well known for this. So we were the first company to develop and bring this distributed system to market, and we've been kind of working on that and refining it over many years now. I would say that the purpose of a distributed charging system is is to really enable the customer, and it sounds a little bit cliche this, but to become more profitable through smarter and more intelligent use of power. Um, I mean, in terms of what that means in practice, a more conventional charging system that you might see on the market will typically have, a certain amount of power sat in a box. And that might be 150 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, for example. Um, and if you're a truck driver or a commuter and you pull up to that box, you might get 150 kilowatts. Now, we try and do that a little bit differently. The power that's available on site, we effectively store in what we call a power unit, and we distribute that power to connectors as and when vehicles demand it. Now, what that means again is that if you're a truck driver and you pull up to one of these boxes, or in our case, what we call a satellite, rather than being able to get 150 kilowatts, you might benefit from 400 kilowatts or 600 kilowatts, for example. Um, and then that available power can be shared intelligently across a number of different connectors. Now, what that means from a driver perspective is that you can charge faster and you can get on the road quicker and you can therefore make more money. What it means from a CPO's perspective, a charge point operator's perspective, is that rather than selling 150 kilowatts to that truck driver, you can sell 400, for example. So it really is a case of using power in an intelligent way to help customers make more money and become more profitable. And that's that's the core Kempower business, really. That's our core product.
I mean, it's a really clever, intelligent piece of technology, really, isn't it? And I see that there are so many really solid use cases to have that in a depot environment, in a commercial environment, because obviously power limitations are the first thing, but equally
Mm.
it's about being able to pull the power when it's required at the right moment. So it's the right power to the right vehicle at the right time, and it's distributed in such a clever way. And
Exactly, exactly. And even for like, and it's not just reactive charging, but overnight dwell times, for example. We talked about ELCVs earlier. You know, vehicles will naturally slow the rate of charge, over the course of a charging session because they want to protect the battery of the vehicle. What it means from our perspective is that, as one battery starts to fill up and the rate of charge slows down, in every 25 kilowatt chunk of power that becomes available, we can redistribute that power somewhere else. So again, it's coming back to that kind of idle power, that kind of idle asset sat there doing nothing. The fact is, through energy versatility, you can make better use of that energy. You can charge more vehicles. You can charge multiple use cases of vehicles at the same location. So that initial investment that depots are going to make, that these fleet operators are going to make in that crucial grid power, and the ongoing KVA capacity charges they're going to see every month on their energy bill, how do you sweat that asset? And distributed power is a really, really good way of doing that. You're not over engineering the solution. You're using that power and that investment really intelligently across your fleet of vehicles.
so you would have the power unit. What sizes do that? Because you mentioned the 25 kilowatt chunks. They're kind of the modules, aren't they? Is that correct terminology? They're the modules that go
Yeah,
into the charger.
exactly. So yeah, so every power module that we have has two channels, two 25 kilowatt channels. So you've got a 50 kilowatt power module, and you can effectively stack those up in a power unit up to 1.2 megawatts.
Okay.
And with all the different kind of variables in between, and obviously, again, over the lifespan of a fleet, you can evolve that upwards or downwards. So you can move power from one site to another site because it is so modular.
And I guess that
Um,
really helps from a future-proofing perspective as well, because what you
Yes.
would then have is the satellite chargers then linked, wouldn't you, to that power module unit. They're the bits that sit in the ground that you would pull up to for those that we try and keep things a little bit basic sometimes here, Gareth, because we're trying to address an audience
Suits
of
me.
people,
I know.
that might not have ever even considered this before. So you have the individual satellite units that are connected to the power modules, and those are the ones that you would pull up to and plug in, and that's where you would start your charging session.
Exactly.
Okay. I mean, it's really clever technology. And I guess from you mentioned user experience a moment ago and trying to make it as simple and as clean and as straightforward for the driver. I mean, when it
Mm.
comes to accessibility and ease of use, what measures do Kempower take to make sure that it really is an easy experience and it's really user friendly for drivers?
Yeah, so there's various kind of features built into the hardware itself, that we've designed specific for that purpose. It's interesting. I saw a presentation yesterday by a chap called Anders Garzadal, who works for Scania, and he gave a really interesting presentation about a truck journey that he's done across Europe, covering thousands of miles in his Scania truck. And I asked him specifically, what was it about? What features of the Kempower technology did he see as really valuable from a user experience? And from his perspective, there were two things that stood out. Um, for one, we offer a QR code on the screen of the charger so that the driver can just scan it with his phone or her phone and take that charge with them, so they can see the state of charge whilst they're having a coffee, for example. That was just a really nice little feature. Um, there's also the ability on the screen to effectively see what is dictating the charge rate at any given time. So whether that's a grid constraint or a power sharing constraint, for example, he found that really useful insight so that he could, you know, just so he could understand what was happening at any given time during that charge session. And ultimately, he talked about the fact that it is just intuitive. When he pulls up and plugs in, the 45-minute mandatory downtime from a truck driver's perspective starts when he plugs in and when the charge session starts. So rather than when he pulls the handbrake on his conventional diesel truck, it is about when the charge session starts. So um, an intuitive kind of authorization process again was so crucial for him, so that he didn't have to download an app. He wasn't have to faff around with too many kind of credit cards. So, for that reason, we've got plug and charge functionality, for example. And for fleets, one of the key things that we offer is our chargers will recognize the MAC ID of the vehicle when it plugs in. So if you have a set of vehicles that are authorized to use your chargers, you can program them into our software solution. And when that vehicle plugs in anywhere on your network, it, the Kempower charger knows that it is authorized to charge that vehicle. So it is effectively a pre-authorization process. Um, so it's secure, but ultimately, from a driver perspective, it's so easy,
I mean,
really straight.
that's an absolute game changer, I would say, in
So easy.
commercial
Yeah.
fleet electric. I never really thought that bit through where you talk about the driver. If their downtime is measured from when the vehicle starts charging, oh my
Mm.
goodness, you can imagine the amount of time that could potentially be taken or swallowed up by downloading the apps, anything goes wrong. The other bit that you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, was about the what's influencing the state of charge. If I just
Mhm.
put myself in a scenario when I go to a service station and I plug my electric car in, straight away, the intuitive thing to do, if it's not getting the right amount of speed, is to blame the charger, isn't it?
Of course, it's
You go, these bloody, I'm not going to name names here, these bloody chargers, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So to have some just information which helps you
absolutely.
understand, because then you just look around and you see that every charger's in use, you understand that it's probably a load sharing situation. If there's
Yeah.
something wrong with the grid, it could even just be a message to say that, we're aware and it's being fixed or something like that.
And it's not going to fix it, but from a driver experience perspective, just having that inside, you know, is such a positive thing.
It's an education
Because
piece for people, isn't
it
it?
is. It really is.
Whether you're new into buying your first electric vehicle or you've been driving a diesel HGV for work for many, many years, it's the concept is new for people. And
Mm.
I think we're now beyond some of the apprehension around plugging the thing in. It's about, right, once we do get it in, from a user experience, I agree with you, it needs to be quick, it needs to be simple, and to have those vehicle securely identified through, what did you say the numbers were? It was
Oh, the Mac ID.
the MAC ID, yes.
Yeah.
So to have that, I mean, that is a massive game changer, I would say, and that
Yeah.
just makes things quite.
It's a really, really, really useful tool, and it's obviously widely used across Kempower estate. I think the other thing that I didn't mention, Tasha, was the cable management system, and probably not the most exciting feature about our chargers. However, you know what? It is a great design. It's a spring-loaded cable system, and the guys in Finland and anyone who knows the Finns will know that they very quietly, very diligently do things very well. And the cable management system is a really good example of that. We were at Move conference last year down at the XL, and I got my first chance to see the new megawatt satellite in person. And it was just so typical of the Finns because I pulled this massive chunky cable out of this satellite. It weighs a ton.
Yeah.
And they've designed a cable management system where it basically just floats. You can literally let go of it and it will float in the air because it's effectively supported by a broader kind of cable management piece of technology. And it's just so simple, but it's so well thought through and so well designed. And again, from a driver experience perspective, it just makes things a little bit better.
But these
So
are the things that I think make Kempower that little bit more unique, because you've
yeah,
thought these things through. I mean, as a female out using DC charging infrastructure all the time, it can be quite heavy and it's
yeah,
clunky. And if you can make the experience as pain-free and as easy for the driver, I think that you're onto something there. And the cable management piece for me is, unfortunately, these cables need to be big and chunky. They just have to be.
yeah.
But in terms of how you can help them help the user experience, I think that's a massive plus from your perspective.
I think
Um,
so.
we talked about HGVs, LCVs, and is there a massive difference when it comes to the charging infrastructure between the two, or is it just it goes back to use case, really, doesn't it? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, and it does go back to use case, but ultimately you can't get away from the fact that HGVs need more power. It's as simple as that, really. Batteries are bigger, and more often than not, there is a requirement to keep the wheels spinning. So dwell times tend to be shorter. So yeah, certainly, we've invested quite heavily in research and development and product development to bring, for example, the high-powered CCS product to market, and then the megawatt charging product. And those solutions are now live and operational across Europe. Um, so yeah, that's it really. It's more power and more energy versatility. So yeah, that's what we try and deliver day to day.
Good stuff. That's some good insight there. So I wanted to now just move on because we're coming towards the end, not quite yet though. Reliability is something that I get quite passionate about, especially working in the fleet space, because you know it- every charging scenario is critical, don't get me wrong, but when you're working in a fleet environment and your whole business relies on uptime and high utilization, and there is a bit of a stigma, I think, when it comes to charging infrastructure not being quite as reliable as it needs to be. I mean, for business critical fleets that are in operation, you're one of the most established hardware manufacturers out there, Gareth. Like, how do you make sure you're optimizing the charging infrastructure and keeping that uptime as high as possible?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So you're absolutely right. I mean, globally and also in the UK, we serve some of the biggest bus fleets, for example. In the UK, we've got around 500 DC chargers installed across bus depots, with a massive presence in London, but also stretching up to Scotland. These are really critical fleets, and the cost and the inconvenience that is caused by a bus missing its route, for example, is astronomical. So yeah, we have got a really good footprint in the market. I would say that good quality design is obviously key, and it comes back to the point I made earlier about kind of well thought through technology, well manufactured solution, intelligent design, and that's something that I think we do really well. I think the other part of the Kempower product that again plays really well into this theme is the modularity of the product. Um, I mentioned the power unit earlier and how that can be modulated up and down. Ultimately things will go wrong. It's inevitable with DC power over time. But the key is that we mentioned that 25 kilowatt chunk. If something goes wrong in one of those power modules, the charging ecosystem or the charging system may lose 25 kilowatts for a period of time, but it can still draw the remainder of power from that power unit.
Yeah.
And again, from a critical fleet perspective, it's not a case that you've got a box that's got 150 kilowatts in it that's kind of down and sat idle. What it means is that actually you just lose a little bit more power than you would have done before until that gets fixed. Um, so we've got a global service network, and like I say, we work with a number of partners around the UK who can deliver some really great SLAs to get to site and swap these modules out and get things, back fully functioning. But again, the product is designed for that. Easy access to critical parts, and it's all about guaranteeing uptime for fleets.
And that was the
So,
point I was going to touch on with it being modular when it comes to your service partners, because
mm,
the ultimate aim is to have somebody on site for as less time as possible, really. So it's about getting in, diagnosing the problem before they arrive to site, making sure that all the diagnostics are in place and they can see what's happening in the software. They turn up to site with the correct replacement, whether it's a comms board or something within the module, and then they just switch it out. So you're not replacing an entire satellite system, or you're not going in and it's not an entire power module that goes down. Again, for me, in my experience, I think that's the comfort fleet managers need to hear. And when there's a distributed power system in play, it does go
mm,
back to making sure that the right hardware is designed, you've got the right use case for it. And that's why I think Kempower do so well in this space, right? Because of how that
I think so.
works.
I think it's so important. And the other bit that you touched on there, Tash, which I think is really important, is diagnostics. One thing that we're investing quite heavily in is advancements in our software system, ChargeEye. so that ultimately, rather than waiting for problems to occur, we can measure the use cycle of different components within the charging system itself, so we can preemptively tell our partners and tell our customers, when certain components might be at risk of failure. So for those really critical fleets, they can actually get ahead of problems before they even happen. ChargeEye is also very good, when it comes to, providing data and insight in terms of diagnostics of issues. So again, that whole diagnostics piece, I think it is also really important, and that's something that we're investing quite heavily in.
I always say it's almost like the customer, i.e., the fleet manager or whoever the customer is, wants to hear as least noise as possible. Because if the diagnostics is working in the correct fashion, then we should be addressing, and you guys should be addressing things well before it becomes a problem for that environment. The
Mm.
other thing I always think of as well is that these guys are not there to be facility managing the charging hardware, right? That's our job. We should be as proactive as possible in making sure that the diagnostics tell us exactly what it needs to, that we can react really, really quickly. And
Mm.
it's our responsibility to be reaching out to the customer to say, we think this needs to happen. We need a quick site visit. Are we okay to come in? They don't need anybody on site approaching them to say this charge is not working, or, it's our responsibility,
Exactly.
isn't it, as the CPO, as hardware manufacturers, to make sure that we're providing them with as much intelligence as possible. But the least
Mm.
they hear, in my mind, the better service that we're giving, if that makes sense.
That is so right. You know, people who are involved in the EV industry, obviously, you can't help but feel excited by the industry and all the things that are happening. But actually, from a fleet perspective, you just want your business to run. You want
And
to,
not hear
you
any
want to support
noise.
your exactly. You want to help your customers. You want to make a profit, and ultimately, like you said, I think the EV market is now at a stage where there are good businesses in the market where who can basically sort this stuff out.
It's
And
confidence, isn't it? I think that's a good
it is
word. It's people having the confidence that the right infrastructure is being installed. It's been designed in the right way for the use case and what it's intended to do. You take into consideration all the things we've discussed today around not just putting the right power in, but making sure we optimize that energy that's going through those assets. And then it's just making sure that once it's in the ground, and it sounds really simple, Gareth, right? But this is my simple view, it just needs to work. And when it
yeah,
doesn't, the customer doesn't need to be involved in fixing it. That's what
no,
experts are there to do. And it should just be this revolving thing that just happens. It just works, right? Vehicles just get the energy that's needed, and the trucks or the vans can go out and do their daily, logistics and move. And then
mm,
and we're there when it does go wrong, and we fix things quite quickly. And I think that if you can offer that in an industry that's booming like this is, I think that's the key in all this. It's giving the customer real confidence. So we are
100%.
just about to wrap up, and for me, it wouldn't be our podcast without just getting some insight from you in terms of looking ahead and what you think. I mean, I'd be intrigued to know like what your views are around what the future of DC charging hardware might look like. You talked about the megawatt charging system. Like for me, technology, the other things that come to mind, like battery storage, vehicle to grid, solar. Like, what's your view in terms of how the industry might move from a Kempower perspective?
Yeah, so you know, our role in life is really to kind of serve the needs of customers and fleets. So we're very much kind of market led, I suppose, in that respect. Um, you know, given that I suppose the broader ambition is the decarbonisation of the transport sector, that naturally presents future opportunities in different sectors. So, marine, for example, is a massive opportunity. The decarbonisation of vessels that move, around the world, it will play a huge part in that global ambition. But also aviation again is a future market. I think ultimately, the way that we see things is that we need to give our customers the right tools to get the job done. And that means, for me, that means energy versatility, charging versatility, and giving our customers the tools that they need to electrify lots of different types of environment. So, like I say, it is market led. Our role in life is to give our customers the tools that they need to be able to electrify in the future.
And I just think it's such an exciting roadmap, isn't it, for EV charging and for this whole kind of just the way that the market's shifting, I think. And, like I've said at the very beginning of the podcast, Gareth, I've worked with Kempower now for such a long time, you in particular. And I just think that being market led is absolutely the right thing to do, right? You need to listen to what
Mhm.
customers are demanding and also be, leading the trail, if you like, in terms of developing that technology quickly, investing in the research and development. You talk about your colleagues in Finland. I mean, that first megawatt charging system that you saw,
Mhm.
these are all the developments that are happening, right? And they're happening right now. So to be able to talk about that openly, I think is such it's a shift, and I'm really excited for what's potentially coming in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And then MCS is a great topic. It's the fact is that as of today, 90% of EHGV journeys can be done with current technology. So the truck OEMs have done a great job of delivering vehicles that can do the job in 90% of cases. There is still 10% of the market that needs en route charging, which I think is really, and MCS is really the enabler for that. And it's the enabler for that full electrification of EHGV. Um, but it will also, inevitably serve a proportion of the market that just wants to top up for convenience as well. But yeah, it's developing these tools that will enable, the decarbonisation of that sector. And like I say, it is market led, but ultimately, our role in life is to try and make that happen and to give CPOs and fleet operators the tools that they need to get the job done.
Fabulous. Well, listen, I've got one final question for you, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today. And I always like this question because I just think, look, we've got an audience of people that potentially just want some advice. So if you were, for our listeners, if they were to take just one thing away from our conversation today, what would it be?
I would say that if you're a fleet operator and you're considering the switch to EV, 100% engage early. Speak to people like Mer well in advance of buying any vehicles, for example, because that period of planning and that period of um, making sure that you're well informed and you can make the right decisions first time will be so important for your experience as a customer as you start to electrify. The grid point is key, and that's something to tackle early. Build your 5-year plan. Make sure use the experience of people that have been here and done it before to make good, informed choices, so that you can really take advantage of the opportunity of electrification.
Excellent advice. I do agree. So that's it for this episode of Fleets Evolved. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Gareth for sharing all of his insight today. If anything we've discussed has raised questions about your own fleet, you'll find a link in the description and on our website to continue the conversation. Or you can fill out our contact form and one of our experts will be in touch. We'll be back soon with another honest discussion on how fleets are really evolving. Goodbye for now.